Synthetics are being declared out of fashion. With viral lists of how to find a real wool winter coat and the rising trends of natural fibers like linen, we seem to be rejecting synthetics after only a century of use. I mean, if synthetic fibers are that bad for the environment and that bad for clothing quality, then why do we use them? Is it just to make clothing cheaper? Are we all being scammed? I've done previous videos on natural fibers, talking about the strengths and weaknesses, various common fabrics, and more. But the difficulty with synthetics, or man-made fibers, is that there is so much variety. Dozens of major fibers with minor brand variations combined with mixed fiber fabrics means there is pretty much an infinite range, which is both their major selling point and their biggest issue. The important thing isn't to cover every single type and variation. That will be just as overwhelming as the options already are. Instead, I'm going to explore the history behind inventing some of the most common fibers today: rayon, nylon, acrylic, polyester, and spandex. What were their original intentions? What features define them? Why do they still exist? And most importantly, should they still have a place in the modern world? Hopefully this will help us understand where they actually work and where they are misused, which means we can make better choices based on what we actually need. Frankly, I learned so much doing the research for this video. I say this having taken multiple textile courses. It took some digging, however, and lots of time, which, as I'm in the middle of moving, is a precious thing right now, and admittedly, some things I'm not keeping up with as well as I would like. My eating schedule has been a little haphazard. That's why I'm so glad the sponsor for today's video is Ritual. It can be difficult to keep up with what my body needs every day, but it's even more important during life's busiest times. With supplements for gut, skin, sleep, and overall body, Ritual has helped me worry less about keeping that part of my life consistent, no matter how unexpected my day is. They do the work for you so you have peace of mind knowing what's going on in your body. Their Symbiotic Plus is a 3-in-1 prebiotic, probiotic, and postbiotic that supports a balanced gut microbiome and digestive health. It's so much more than just a typical probiotic. It also contains prebiotics to support the growth of beneficial bacteria and postbiotics to support gut barrier function. I've been relying on it through my cross-country move, living in a temporary place, starting a new job, and so much that would normally be throwing my gut off balance. My life isn't regular right now, but at least one part of my day can be. It's just one minty capsule daily with or without food, so I don't have to worry about remembering to take it at the same time every single morning with breakfast. It's so easy to manage, and with Ritual subscription service, I also never have to worry about running out, which always happens when things get the busiest and you need support the most. So if you're looking to make at least one part of your day more predictable, check out Ritual. Just click the link below to get 25% off your first purchase. Thanks again to Ritual for sponsoring today's video. Before man-made fibers, we mostly relied on linen, cotton, wool, and silk. Silk especially has been a long-desired fiber, though not always the most expensive option. Plenty of quality or just fashionable options were available from the other fibers at much higher price points than many regular silks. It's not just its sheen that is desirable and fashionable though, but also its strength that is immensely useful, as it is a long filament rather than a short staple. Fewer breaks mean stronger threads. So silk is practical for many industrial purposes, like parachutes, not just fashion. Early attempts to mimic silk varied from spun glass to polished cotton, even gelatin. The earliest man-made fiber to become manufactured fabric, though it was not a popular option for long, was that of artificial silk. It was invented by Hilaire de Chardonnay around 1887, supposedly accidentally after some work with photographic chemicals. I found a few differing descriptions of the exact process, but it was based in cellulose, like cotton, linen, wood, etc., and combined it with a series of nitric acid, sulfuric acid, alcohol, then extruded it through a glass nozzle system to create the long fibers. The general process of liquefying and extruding is what will really come to define all man-made fibers. The problem here, however, was that it was very flammable. This was mostly solved with running it through a solution of ammonia after production, but continued to be a valid concern for consumers. But the potential benefits outweighed the hyped up risk. Some of the early discussions around artificial silk actually focus on the opportunity to use waste product, in this case paper, for man-made goods, and how that would benefit both industry and environment. It never really caught on in large production globally, however, as supposedly the extrusion process left the fibers too uneven. However, numerous other researchers were working on their own methods of turning cellulose into an extrudable fiber around the turn of the 20th century. One new process allowed wood pulp to be used rather than a lignin-free source. That's the stuff that gives the structure to cell walls in wood. It was named viscose after the viscosity of the product partway through the process. Companies were even formed under this name. This did complicate things, as viscose was not used for just one specific fiber, but anything that was processed in a similar way, including cellophane. So most companies continue to use artificial silk as the customer-facing name, but that felt inaccurate, as by this point it was no longer just used to mimic silk qualities, but was well known for its high luster as well as being color-fast and light-fast. Essentially, washable silk that didn't lose its shine, but with even more variations in texture than real silk could manage. The fiber had also improved greatly in the beginning of the 20th century, and they no longer wanted to be associated with the older quality under that name. By 1923, it was determined that the world of textile manufacturers needed an agreed-upon name. Lots of options were put forward, even Chardonnay to harken back to its originator, but the first name put forward to be agreed upon by a committee was Gloss, with one S. Due to the varied response by customers, by July they had approved the name Rayon instead. Today, viscose is still used in some regions of the world, but officially it refers to the precise chemical process, while rayon is the broader term, which includes the lyocell process, under which also falls tencel, which was created in the 1970s to have less environmental impact. It doesn't use carbon disulfide, which is highly toxic. It's an issue more in production, not in wear. It is more expensive, however, so less commonly used. And also commonly mentioned on tags and clothing listings, so that is useful. Notably, bamboo rayon doesn't really mean anything so far as qualities, as it's part of the viscose process that breaks down any wood-type pulp and renders it all the same chemically. It just may be useful to know from an environmental standpoint where the cellulose came from, though it seems like lyocell and tencel would be still a better option. Another term you'll often hear is modal, a viscose process that stretches the fibers when wet so they are less sensitive to heat. Generally, rayon is considered washable, more so than silk, but drying with heat can cause shrinkage. Additionally, cellulose acetate, or just acetate as it often is called, is very similar to rayon and was once considered the same fiber process. It just uses acetic acid instead, but just has even more sensitivity to heat. It straight up melts with direct heat exposure. But it does take well to permanent imprinting, like creating moire patterns or setting in permanent pleats, even when mixed into other fibers. The next man-made and the first truly synthetic fiber was nylon. Announced under that name at the New York World's Fair in 1938, the development of fiber number 66 was an effort of DuPont in the 1930s, resulting in a thermoplastic polymer. Neoprene rubber was actually the other polymer that was developed at the same time by DuPont. For nylon, though, instead of focusing solely on being a silk replacement through shininess, they wanted to make a strong, durable option. When extruded into fine threads, it also allowed for stretch, all while still maintaining a pleasant luster. First suggestions of use were for stockings instead of silk, and bristles for toothbrushes. Though advertisements for nylon being as strong as steel and producing no-run stockings were pulled back upon realizing that may be an overstatement, a big one, as runs were apparently a definite issue. Nylon also had to push back against associations with one of the chemicals involved in its manufacture, cadaverine. Though made from coal in their production process, it was named after first being found in exactly what the name sounds like: Somehow, having an association between fine stockings and dead bodies wasn't seen as great advertising. Still, nylon survived some early hiccups and was quickly in everything from bathing suits to tennis rackets to carpet packing, which still rely on it today. This was in large part because laundering and drying did far less damage than typical to silk, an important factor in something as fine as hosiery in a world increasingly reliant on washing machines, rather than gentler hand washing. Its biggest issue initially was that it doesn't breathe. Even in something as fine as stockings, sweat really has nowhere to go. It can also be itchy and full of static cling. Blending at least tempers these problems, and it's often found mixed with cotton, polyester, or wool to give them added durability, strength, stretch, and color fastness. Notable is that it does melt at high heat, though it can deal with higher heat than cellulose, like cotton, linen, or rayon, which will ash when burnt. As far as modern environmental impact, the production is about on par with wool so far as carbon, and is not the worst option in terms of greenhouse gases. However, nylon produces toxic fumes and ash when burned, and is very expensive to recycle. It also takes 30 to 40 years to break down, and most ends up in landfills. There are some companies that advertise recycled nylon, however, so it's not impossible to find. By the 1940s, synthetic and plastic fibers were touted as the future of textiles. Blending was a topic of discussion, as some claimed it was useful, offering the ability to make lighter, warmer, crease-resistant, or more durable variations of natural fibers. Others were concerned about the unpredictable range this would create in terms of quality and attributes. How much was being mixed in wasn't always clear. The synthetic textile field was far from slowing down regardless, and the next big invention was acrylic, another polymer fiber with at least 85% acrylonitrile monomer, which is a combination of vinyl and a nitrile molecular group. Unlike the previous inventions of rayon and nylon, which resembled silk, acrylic was much better at mimicking short staple wool or cotton. It was particularly loved as a wool blend since it offered a lighter weight for the same density, something they especially pushed for summer or tropical weight suiting. Acrylic also doesn't wrinkle as easily and can be heat set, like other synthetics. DuPont advertised their Orlon acrylic as a mohair style fiber initially. It quickly gained popularity in knitwear as well, since it resisted shrinkage and felting in the wash while still retaining the fuzzy woolen texture. Since so much of acrylic's benefits revolve around being washable, one of the bigger concerns acknowledged today is that of microplastics. It releases large quantities of microfibers in a typical wash cycle, say nothing of what happens when you wear it, even more so than polyester, which is the next synthetic fiber in the story and probably the most broadly used today. Technically, polyester was developed back in the 1920s, named so because it's a polymer that has ester linkages. It needed more research to become a viable textile option, however. DuPont, again, bought rights to polyester in the 1940s, temporarily naming it Fiber V. A bit of work and a brief few months of advertising it as Amylar in 1951, DuPont settled on Dacron as their brand name for the fiber and began the move towards larger production. The attributes they claimed were that it is highly resistant to wrinkling, bleach, heat, and stretching or shrinking when wet or dry. Essentially the perfect fabric for the 1950s washing machine and dryer set, aside from the static buildup and pilling of little balls with abrasion, of course. By 1953, DuPont was announcing variations on the extrusion shapes and lengths to produce Dacron fibers that were more wool-like and fuzzy versus long and smooth. These would work for cotton blends as well. Polyester has only expanded in terms of variations in extrusion styles to completely change its attributes over the years, resulting in everything from sweat-wicking sportswear to sweat-smothering dress shirts. In fact, polyester as the fiber that we know is only one of many applications that vary widely depending on how the polymer is extruded. Even many plastic bottles, like those for sodas or laundry detergent, are actually polyester. It's the same stuff. Not surprisingly, this type of polymer does not break down naturally and can easily release microplastics when washed or abraded. However, it does well with recycling, hopefully an industry that can keep growing quickly. I want to also note here the difference between the fiber itself breaking down and clothing breaking down. If the fiber sheds easily, it will eventually thin and wear down the fabric, losing its bulk and wearing out the garment. It's just that those tiny little fiber bits don't ever biodegrade. Your shirt, sweater, whatever it is just scattered like glitter around the world. Regardless, washability and long-term durability were the key features of the next and last textile on our list. Originally modified off of Dacron polyester in the late 1950s, spandex required a new production method. It does not melt in high heat, but instead is suspended in solvent, which will evaporate during the process. The result was an incredibly strong and stretchy fiber that bounced back repeatedly. Spandex was chosen as an anagram of expanse. DuPont's brand name for their version, Lycra, is what caught on in other regions outside of the US, or sometimes variation on elastane or elastine is used instead, referring again to the key feature. Its immediate success was with the undergarment industry, replacing rubber in girdles, bras, and more. Spandex is lighter weight, more breathable, and doesn't break down as quickly as rubber, a feature that actually concerned undergarment companies who relied on replacements of worn-out pieces to keep customers buying. It's also dyeable, something rubber always struggled with historically. Granted, that doesn't so much mean it's great at those things like breathability, just better than a literal sheet of rubber. Though as the undergarment industry reduced their need as girdles and the like fell out of favor, spandex became the star of athletic wear in the 1970s and 80s. Since spandex gives stretch to woven textiles, even in small amounts, it's often mixed into cottons or even polyesters to give just a little bit more ease and fit. Importantly, this does render any textile it's mixed into at 5% or more as not recyclable, due to the fact that spandex requires a volatile solvent. That solvent is not the easiest to manage from a safety standpoint either, as it can be absorbed through the skin or respiration, something that led to decades of workers suffering from fertility issues and cancer when proper protection was not provided or even discussed. Aside from this, spandex has much the same issues as all of the other synthetic fibers on an environmental scale, with microplastic loss and lack of biodegradation, in addition to the chemical and energy issues of their production. While continuous variations of each fiber were being created throughout the 20th century, it really was this explosion of options in the first half of the century that changed the landscape of fabrics. The effect on the customer was dizzying. Keeping track of each patented name and variation was nearly impossible. A helpful chart from 1956 explains each major fiber, its good and bad qualities, and most importantly, how to launder it successfully. Though easy care was the most consistent push behind the invention of all of these fibers, they weren't all equal in all things. Nylon requires special care with colors. Dacron shrinks as a knit. Rayon wrinkles but doesn't like high heat irons. So even in the 1950s, natural fiber companies were pushing back with advertisements about buying, quote, the real thing. It certainly sounds less complicated after that chart. In 1960, some effort to rein this in the US was made by requiring labels in clothing to divulge the percentage of their fiber types. At least then you weren't relying on memory or advertisement to be correct when laundering. I even came across some later advertisements for laundry detergent specifically meant to tackle synthetics, since, as they claimed, they hold onto dirt more than natural fibers. I do wonder how this may have affected the composition of all detergents as our fiber usage has changed over the decades. While each one of these fibers and their variants has slightly different purposes behind their invention, they've all grown off of the same line of technology. Take a base, find out how to chemically turn it into a viscous liquid, and extrude it through nozzles of different shapes. Most are basically plastic, so they hold on to their final state very consistently. Though obviously, breakage on such a small scale is perpetually an issue. The biggest problem for us as consumers, as it always has been apparently, is that there are just so many variations on not just how these fibers are produced with different chemicals and environmental impacts, but that they are often mixed into other fibers, which means that our experience with that fabric is going to be even more complicated in how the clothing feels, wears, washes, and recycles or biodegrades. It's also unclear why some garments have the blends that they do. Not everything is clearly advertised as to its intended qualities. Admittedly, the majority of the time, the mix of synthetic fibers added in is done to reduce the cost while maintaining the look and feel of natural fibers. Even in things like jeans with a little bit of spandex, it's intended to help them fit a wider body range without having to spend as much time and effort on patterning or producing variations of shapes and proportions. So it saves the manufacturer money in that way as well. All that to say that, yes, there are things that synthetics do that natural fibers either can't or at least struggle to do, or they're just downright costly. Of course, there's always second-hand clothing too, and if you want to know more about the history of that, I have a whole video on the background of thrifting to go check out. But it's good to know what those features are, so you can either shop specifically for them, or possibly avoid synthetics if you don't need them. We all have different needs in our closets, and there's no one perfect answer, but knowledge is the first step in supporting the change we want to see in the world.
Are you a pooty girl? Oh, you just screamed at me. You're doing your best, buddy. You're so patient.
Good job. Hi. I love you all so much.
Oh, Griff. Oh, he's like Miss Nicole.
You kind of need a bath, buddy.